Behind the images of power and money are real people with real stories, plans of hard work, sacrifice, and making the best decisions, turning failure into great achievement. Join us in conversation with leading business owners as we learn the secrets of how to gain long-term success, mistakes made, lessons learned, and how to build the kind of wealth that lasts for generations. Welcome to Wealth Wednesdays, hosted by Chicago Treasurer Melissa Conyears-Ervin. Join us now and build your own success story.
Welcome to Wealth Wednesdays. I'm your host, Chicago City Treasurer Melissa Conyears-Ervin, and I am so glad that you have joined us on today. Wealth Wednesdays is a quarterly series that aims to inspire wealth creation by featuring successful individuals like CEOs, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and civic leaders who share their stories and give you practical tips for achieving your own financial success. As you may know, helping Chicagoans create and grow generational wealth is part of my mission and my role as treasurer. And that's why we have features such as this. Now, today we have a wonderfully accomplished guest whose journey as a woman in the world of finance will inspire you. Certainly inspires me, and whose advice as an investor and business owner will help you grow your wealth. This is a very exciting segment, and so we're glad to have today Ms. Suzanne Yoon, managing partner and founder of Kinzie Capital Partners, and she has been investing in mid-market companies for more than 25 years. Wow, she looks 25. She currently serves as chair of the investment committee for Kinzie and as board chair of Kinzie's portfolio companies, including Colony Display, Chelsea Lighting, GT Golf Holdings, and Arctic Industries. In 2017, Suzanne launched Kinzie as part of her long-standing vision to advance the use of technology and innovation to help companies grow and succeed. Suzanne serves on numerous private company and civic boards, including the National Philanthropic Trust, Chicago's John G. Shedd Aquarium, and the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. Wow. Please welcome Suzanne Yoon. Let's kind of start off with who you are, your background. Certainly you have a very dynamic background, but tell us about your professional path, really how you made it to where you are today, and really start with how you knew that you wanted to pursue a career in finance, because as a woman, certainly we know that that is not easy. So how did you even start your career path, and what made you want to get in finance?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I love this city. I am a native Chicagoan. My parents actually immigrated to Chicago from South Korea. Wow. To pursue an American dream. And with really nothing. My father was an engineer, my mother was a nurse, and then my father quickly realized with language barriers, he wasn't really able to get promoted at the pace that he wanted to. And so he literally borrowed money from friends, family, and bought a deli in Cicero, Illinois. And that was his first business. And if I think back to the first time I had to, I was working, I was probably in preschool or kindergarten, and I would go to my dad's deli because I didn't have a babysitter. That would be the way he would babysit me after school. And I did my homework, and then I would stock cigarettes for him in exchange for Twix bars. So that was my first job at the age of about 5. And I followed, I obviously grew up in an entrepreneurial home. And he went from, that deli in Cicero then to opening and buying businesses really on the south and west sides of Chicago that were underserved. And if you go back to the 80s, a lot of immigrants actually did that, right? They built businesses in the south and west side. So I was really fortunate to have had a lot of diversity in my life growing up early. Unfortunately, when I was 10, my father was shot in an armed robbery. And I was the oldest of 4. Actually, I was the oldest of 3, and we were living in the Peterson Park area at the time. And my mother was a nurse, and she worked at Cook County Hospital. And she decided, I think she had 3 children and she was 4 months pregnant with my youngest brother. And so she decided to move us to an area that had good SAT scores. That happened to be in Northfield, Illinois, and I ended up going to New Trier High School because of that. And you know, and the reason I started with that story of how did I get into finance was moving to the North Shore, and you know, we had a lot of challenges with a single-family home, minority family. I think we were the first minority family to move into Northfield, Illinois in the mid-'80s.
Wow.
And there was a town hall meeting about us, and it was just an interesting time, but I didn't know any better because I was like blinders on. We just worked hard, studied hard. That was what I was taught. And what was great about growing up there, despite the lack of diversity that I kind of experienced, coming from a very diverse, you know, thinking about just what I described, South Side, West Side, you know, growing up around Black, brown, white, you know, Asian, yellow, I mean, everyone, and then going to an area that was like had no diversity. But for some reason, like I think the way my, what I was taught and the way we were raised was focus on your education, work hard, meritocracy will win, right? Like you work hard, that's what you do. So I did. I studied, I did well in school. I ended up going to University of Iowa on a full scholarship. And what I was exposed to probably in high school that I wasn't exposed to living in the city was all of a sudden I saw my friends' parents who were CEOs, financiers, lawyers, doctors, and also had great financial stability, and what that meant to have that. And so as I went to college, for me, part of it was, what can I do? I still have this, I think even back then, you know, when you're young, you want to change the world, and I certainly did want to do that. I actually thought I would go, you know, I wanted to study political science, economics, and writing. I ended up majoring in economics, but my draw, I would say, to finance was a few things. One, I wanted financial stability for myself and my family. And 2, I saw that having financial stability, and money, like really give you power and influence. And I think the third was, and I'm a product of 80s movies, so we watched things like Wall Street and Pretty Woman. And if I go back to my earliest days of thinking about how to make money, because I knew I wanted that. I remember watching Pretty Woman and thought, I have a much better shot of learning what the character that Richard Gere, you know, like represented, did for a living. He was a private equity investor. That's what he did.
I realized that.
That's what he did. He was buying businesses and breaking them up, and then, you know, he meets this girl, right, and then she teaches him she should build, and at the end he starts building the businesses. And there's lots of different types of private equity investing. There's certainly that type of investing where you build businesses and you break them up and you sell assets off. There are others where you buy businesses and you build on those businesses. And so Pretty Woman, just going back to Pretty Woman, I remember thinking I have a much better shot of learning what he does than waiting for some guy to rescue me off a street corner. And so I was not willing to wait for someone to rescue me. I think that's really what drew me to Wall Street and finance, and it is hard. It was very hard. But I started, and I love numbers. I love numbers. I think the game of numbers for me is what is really fun too, because if it adds up, you're winning, right?
That's right.
Right.
That's right. I love it to add and balance at the end. That I'm all about that. I won. Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I want to win, right? I want that for my companies. I want that for my family. I want that for other people. I think that's why this whole idea of Wealth Wednesday is it's so great to be able to tell people it's okay to build. Like, you have to build the wealth. It doesn't just come.
Okay, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, that's how I got into what I do. And I started in banking because I knew I wanted to. I didn't know anything about private equity when I actually started in banking, but I started in banking, then eventually ended up in doing, money management, which is what I'm doing now, but specifically investing in middle market private equity companies.
Wow. So you were not willing to wait for someone to rescue you. I think I'm going to make a post about that, a social media post. I have to tell you, that's very powerful. You knew that you had to get up and do it yourself. You admitted that it was not easy, certainly as a woman, a minority woman in finance. You also stated something that I thought was very interesting. I do this Wealth Wednesdays because there are so many people like myself and yourself, raised in the inner city, and what you said a moment ago about when you moved to the suburbs, all of your friends' parents were CEOs, entrepreneurs, and you stated you saw something there that you had not seen in the inner city. Certainly, of course, your father was a business owner. But that was a very interesting statement. And so when you went to college, it was a no-brainer for you because of what you had seen. Suzanne, that is so powerful. And there's a statement that a child cannot be what a child cannot see. And you were fortunate to have that opportunity. But we know there are so many young people that do not. And so I always hope that when parents see these segments, that they will show this to their children. And by the way, no child is too young. Suzanne and I were talking before this segment, and both of us have third graders. She has a third grade boy, I have a third grade daughter. And as you know, they learn early. It is not too early to expose your children to these type of conversations. And so I very much appreciate everything within that one question that I asked you, but it is so powerful. And I hope that people that are listening not only share it with their children, but share it with their friends. Because at the end of the day, when you say you were not willing to wait for someone to rescue you, that's powerful within itself. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And so I want to move into talking about people that are entrepreneurs, business owners that are having challenges. Certainly, you as a business owner for over 25 years have seen your share, I'm certain, of obstacles and challenges. Let's talk a little bit about access to capital. Because we know, especially those that are from the inner city, business owners, and you watched your father, and it's also amazing that you remember so much. When your father passed at such a young age, you were only 10 years old, but you obviously were well beyond your years, being the oldest, you mentioned, of your siblings. But let's talk about obstacles of business owners and access to capital. And let's really talk about how, especially private equity, with that being your expertise, do you think that Chicago business owners are even aware of private equity and the funding that really goes with that and options that are available? Because a lot of business owners do look to access capital, and I'm not certain that they're even aware about private equity options.
Yeah, I think private equity has always historically been a very, it was always meant for like really rich people. Right? I mean, it's like in an asset class of its own.
Just saying private sounds like
yes,
it's not attainable.
Right.
Yeah.
With that said, I think that there has been a lot of, I would say, movement, and a lot of it has actually been driven by civic organizations and government entities to get more, get better access to capital for people, right? Because especially as a small business owner, when you're starting out, some of the challenges I think that smaller business owners, and obviously the businesses we are investing in are not small. We say lower middle market, but they generally tend to be, 30 to 250 million of revenue.
And that's
and that's lower middle market.
Wow.
That's considered lower middle market
Wow.
in the institutional private equity community. When I think about local businesses, especially the way my father started out, he didn't have access even to bank lending, right? Community lending, those type of programs didn't exist. So the only way that he could have started a business was literally save every penny he had, put his entire family at risk to do that, and then also borrow money at very high, probably like illegal interest rates is my guess.
Wow.
Like I don't know this for sure, but
You are talking the language of those that are listening.
So people are taking money from their friends and family, and it's like on a piece of paper or on the back of an envelope. Sometimes it's dirty. I mean, it's not safe money. So the community programs, the community lending programs are really important. And I think that, that's one of the things I have seen the city of Chicago and other cities and governments do well, is making sure that the banks have requirements right around community lending. And then there are also on the flip side of that, there are organizations that just have no ability to access small business loans, even small business loans, because you're starting out. And where funds have developed that I think are really interesting are impact funds, venture funds. And again, these are mostly government and community organization driven initially. But as people see that backing entrepreneurs, being able to put in money early into seed funds, and they are risky because a lot of businesses don't survive that early. But that's all very like critical, and that we should be thinking about how, and it creates returns. It also creates returns for pensioners. It creates real returns for the city and for all of, all the different municipalities that are doing that. Not everyone does it well, but I do think that there's still a gap, but there are better programs in place today than there certainly were 30 years ago. I think it will continue to progress. Now, impact funds are really important because they are meant to create, not just be a social vehicle, right? But they're to actually create returns. But they're very specific on what the measurements are in terms of creating those returns. So backing certain entrepreneurs, making sure that people of color and underserved communities are being, addressed, because businesses need to exist in those communities as well, right? So.
And impact funds, by the way, it's actually very popular these days, as you mentioned, and I expect that it will continue to progress. And so for those that are in business or desire to be, please definitely do your research about impact funds, because that is very important. And there's a lot of investment tools available for that. Yeah. So very good point.
Well, and there are other programs that I think that the municipalities, governments, like people don't know about, that would be really helpful for entrepreneurs, like tax credits. That I would say, these are, there are programs out there, but accessing them sometimes is really challenging.
It is.
Yeah.
It can be. And that's why, too, there's many even departments within the city of Chicago, like Department of Planning, like Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, where people can do their research. Even the Department of Procurement. There are so many different departments within the city of Chicago. Their website has so much information about different programs, funding that is available for small business owners. Because one thing that you stated again, that is so many nuggets today, but when you stated that your father certainly took that risk, but it was probably a risk that really put your family in danger. But I really related when you stated that. And I know that so many listeners can as well, that are entrepreneurs, that are at the point they don't have these type of funds to really fund the business as they need to. And so they are in a position that they're putting their families at risk. And we always talk about risk, right? In finance, no risk, no return, but not risk to the point that you're putting your family in jeopardy. And there should be funding options and opportunities and access to capital. And while it has gotten better, certainly there could be much more improvement. Yeah. So I can really appreciate that. And so when we talk about, again, private equity, and this is a great conversation because I know it's probably a new topic to many people, but when you think about businesses, what would you say, or what do you see as the primary growth goals for local businesses that are interested in private equity?
So when you get to so there are different types of private equity funds. You know, we talk about venture, which is very early, it's earlier stage, and sometimes they are growing in revenue but don't quite have profitability yet. Mm-hmm. There are funds that are even focused on earlier stage than that, which is seed. When someone has a great idea, they've now developed it, but they have to start raising capital to get it launched. When it gets to my stage, where it's private equity, where we are not investing we may be investing in an entrepreneur, but we're usually acquiring a business. And then once we acquire the business, we're now looking at how do we grow it, create a return for all of the investors that have invested with us. And a lot of times that is acquisition, new markets, sometimes really change in management teams. But along the way, and there are different types of asset classes. So like this is where, studying the different ways to invest. So we buy companies. There are other private equity firms that only do real estate, right? Invest in real estate as an asset class. So various different ways to go about private equity. When I am looking at a business, and we want to grow. And the expansion that we're talking about is if we're buying a company that is at 20 million of revenue, I probably want to get it to 50, right? Like my goal is always, can I double the size of a company during my hold period, which is usually about 5 years. Okay. And so it is very intense. And I have to do that so I can, make the returns for all of our investors, who include state pension funds and the pensioners, right? So when I'm looking for growth opportunities, I'm really thinking about, what is a unique, is there a unique service or product that a company has brought to market, but they haven't been able to scale? They haven't been able to scale above where they are because they don't have the right infrastructure, they don't have the right technology, and most of the time it's like the right leadership in place to get it. Because sometimes
most of the time, that's interesting that you said that.
Well, it's because sometimes starting a company and getting it, from 0 to 10 is very hard, but it's sometimes a different skill set to get it from, 10 to 100. And then from 100 to a billion, right? Like all of those skill sets change kind of along the way sometimes.
And that's why a true leader knows when their time has expired. That's interesting.
They do, or you move into different roles.
That's interesting.
Right, so you stay because I would say the beauty of, companies that are, I would say entrepreneur-led is that there is so much passion and ownership of that. And I can say that because I'm an entrepreneur. Starting Kinzie from just an idea and having to raise capital, and we have, to raise the kind of capital that I had to, and it didn't all come from me, was almost like an impossible feat. And when I started the business in 2017, there were literally I could count on one hand across the country female-led private equity funds. And I think I was either number 1 or 2. And so private equity, control, buyout private equity, that's how we define what we do. And there are, just so you know, there are 6,500 funds in the United States alone. And I was, at the time, I think
in
there
just
were
2017.
Yeah, in 2017, there were 2,500 firms focused on private equity, buyout, and growth, and I think there were maybe 3 female-led funds in the entire country at
But
the
that's
time.
no surprise.
No,
That's
it's
no
not a surprise. Yeah.
It should not be. It's disappointing.
Yeah.
Disappointing, but it's no surprise. And it's amazing of the tenacity of women, while we're talking about that, let me state, it's amazing to me the tenacity of women, how we're always pretty much the first or second or third out of 2,500. But we somehow overcome obstacles and barriers, and we get to where we are and we reach back and help others. And that's really what it's all about. And I can appreciate, especially even when you talk about so much opportunity that's available within Chicago. And you were mentioning about the city of Chicago and the work that it does. And I was actually thinking, what more can we as a government do to really encourage private equity firms to invest in Chicago's businesses? And I know a lot of business owners would love to hear that, but what more can we do as a government? And do you think that there are certain initiatives or policies that can really drive that local investment for Chicagoans?
Well, I do think it always starts with the investment offices, and I think you mentioned too, this is across private equity, but the tax incentives, making sure those are very clear, that's a huge incentive for people to be here, right? Creating a labor force. I think one of the highlights of Chicago for me, and obviously I mentioned this, I'm a native Chicagoan, but I did spend most of my career in New York. And there was a lot of discussion, I had a lot of internal discussion about, do I stay on the East Coast where there is less focus on me being a woman, and I did feel that. I did not feel, I knew in New York City, to some degree, it didn't matter as much like what I looked like, who I was, what my race was, what sex I was, as long as I made money.
It was the results.
It was a result. It's very meritocracy based in New York City, and Chicago is a little, it's different. And so when I came back here, it was like, well, what are the things that really, what we need, right? And Chicago is a great city. One of the biggest, I think, highlights we have is we have some of the best universities and education systems in the country in Chicago. This is a city that produces incredible talent. So I also think that's really important for the government to be partnered with the universities across the board. I mean, people know about University of Chicago and Northwestern and University of Illinois and UIC, but we also have incredible schools like DePaul and also some of even the best community colleges, right? DePaul, Loyola. I think that is a huge draw. So if you can continue to produce talent that stays in Chicago, how do you keep people in Chicago? Because companies will come here if they know that talent is here, right? Because a company's just a company without people. And so I think that's also a really critical thing to promote and for the government to promote.
So let's kind of do like an education 101 here. And I'm going to move on to a question that I wanted to ask you about, because both of us are from underserved communities, and thinking about how private equity, and this really will kind of come full circle for those that are listening that may not be familiar with private equity, but how does private equity even align with Chicago's economic goals, especially those within underserved communities? What do you think about that? How could private equity, the investment in it, even align with our goals within Chicago?
Well, I think you need to create jobs, right? We need to create jobs in Chicago, because I think that has always been, like making sure that we create jobs in Chicago and keep them here is really critical.
Keep them here.
Yes, and Chicago used to be a center for manufacturing. So whether that is in the city of Chicago or on, within kind of the Chicagoland area. So we have a company that actually does manufacture in Cook County. And I think that's one of the things that we really have to think about now. What is really important to the business community for our employees? And if you're going to have manufacturing and businesses in Chicago, I think the first and foremost is safety. It's going to be safety. It's going to be education for their families, right? How do you keep your family safe? How do you go to work safe? Transportation. I mean, there are a lot of things that Chicago is doing, but we need to continue to make sure that, I would say right now, everywhere I go, every business owner I talk to, mostly are concerned about the safety in Chicago.
I think that was interesting, though, when you talked about, in addition to safety, education for the family. And really, one of the reasons we do this Wealth Wednesdays, for me, as a young lady, I mentioned to you that I was born in Inglewood and raised on the west side of Chicago, all by a single mother. And certainly for you, even with your father passing at such a young age, your mother was a nurse and really worked hard for her family to make ends meet. But that's really important to me personally, to educate the family. And it's important that our children have the proper opportunities within their schooling. They should know about finance, CEOs, entrepreneurship, and not just the entrepreneurship that we're accustomed to, where people are struggling so much. That may be a side of the entrepreneurship that we see in the inner city versus what you may have seen in the suburbs with successful entrepreneurs, CEOs doing very well. Those are the type of people that we want our young people to be able to see full circle. They should have access to all of those opportunities. And so I can really appreciate, and we really want to help not only the young people, but the parents be successful as well. It is not easy trying to manage it all, especially for some parents being in a one-parent household. Even, of course, a two-parent household is not easy these days. But financial health is so very important. And as you know, it truly has an effect on so many other areas of your life. So all of this is just very important. But I was going to also ask you, I know we only have a few more minutes, but when you think about measuring the success of private equity investments in local businesses, can you share some success stories of Chicago businesses that have thrived after private equity investment?
Oh, I think there are so many, and I can't state names, but I do know there are, most businesses don't grow without private investment. They do not. Because whether you are you start to build a business and you take the cash flow in that business and reinvest it, that's also private investment, right? You're reinvesting that into the business to grow. If you look at I would guarantee you almost every business in the city of Chicago, whether it is 5 years old or 100 years old, did not grow without actual private investment back in, right? That means building out plants, buying equipment. You need capital to do those things. Having a plan, and so just look around you, right? Like I drive around all the time and I think, of all the businesses that have started in Chicago and have been sold, like Blomer's Chocolates just got sold. It's like I think about all these companies that have been sold and now are part of bigger conglomerates, but they all started small. But it doesn't happen overnight.
That's right.
And I think that's the same with, like my dad, right? Bought a deli, then he bought other businesses. Then I learned from that. I studied. I started with nothing, and I grew, and I invested my money. And when other people were spending it on expensive cars, like I didn't do that. Like you have to make really good decisions with your capital, and that is true for businesses too. Businesses just can't, businesses can't grow without profit. So it's impossible. It's impossible to do that. And so I do think there are so many. I just can't think of any right off the top of my head that I can share. But if you look around and look at all the signs, they're all Chicago businesses, right? Just look around.
Private investments.
And
But
they
that was
grew.
But that was interesting when you spoke about people buying fancy cars and things of that sort that you weren't buying at the time. Certainly in economics, we learned the terminology of deferred gratification.
Yes.
And that is something that actually I live by. And I don't say that often enough, probably for those that follow me, but deferred gratification is truly something that I learned while I was in college in economics, and I stood true to that. I believe that, of course, I want great things. I want finer things in life. Who wouldn't? Of course, I want the finer cars and this, that, and the other. But I believed at the time that I needed to invest in myself. And then in time, that will come. That's what it means when it says deferred gratification. That doesn't mean you don't want the gratification, you just defer your plans until later. Certainly now, you can buy all the I'm just saying, and anybody with common sense knows if you're the owner of Kinzie Capital, that you are able to purchase the fine cars that you want now. But you were honest, and I appreciate that a moment ago in stating that you had to just wait on some things that you wanted to purchase while others, and sometimes that's hard as a business owner too, right? You're looking at so many others around you and they are purchasing all of these great things and you're thinking, wow, it would be great to have that. But you say, no, I want to have a plan and I know that that will come at the right time. So I can appreciate that. Okay, so last question. Yes. I always want to leave with the last question for the young people, because when I asked you in the beginning how you started in finance, and great that you had the opportunity to see so many CEOs and entrepreneurs at the time, where some of our young people may not necessarily have that same opportunity. What advice would you give a young person looking to pursue a career in finance, particularly someone who doesn't come from a family that even has that experience in that field?
So I actually came from a family who had no experience in that field, right? My father was, I mentioned, an engineer, and then my mother was a nurse. So it was all I was told was go into medicine. We want you to be a doctor or maybe a lawyer, because a lawyer sounds great and they're very prestigious at the time. And I kind of pursued a different path. But I would say, it is never too early to start networking. It is never too early to find mentors and be aggressive about finding mentors and, asking for help. Most people want to help. And if they don't, then they're lost, right? So I think it is really important to find those mentors. And then as you start your career, you go into your career, really start to identify not just mentors, but sponsors. And also know that it is not their job to mentor you, it's your job to seek out the mentorship. And this is, again, a meritocracy-based philosophy. But if you want something, you really have to look for it. You have to find it. Opportunities, they say a lot of times it's like luck. Yes, sometimes people get lucky, but you do make your own luck, right? You have to pursue the things that you want and make sure you don't, when you have opportunities and you're in front of people, be aggressive, show up, seek out the right mentorship, ask people, network early. And I would say that, and for the rest of your life, I'm still networking. And I didn't mention this early, but I am really, really fortunate to have had incredible mentors throughout my career and sponsors and advisors, and I still do. I still need them, and not only as a group of peers, but also people who have had the success that I would like to see, with my portfolio companies and in my own life. And even as a parent, I even seek out, mentorship and help, in that, because it's really critical when we talk about, how are we raising like this next generation of children and how important that is. So,
and this generation is different than the last generation, just like the last generation was different than us. So I understand. Well, we have learned a lot today. Certainly, I can appreciate the honest conversation, the frank conversation, your transparency. That was very, very important. I know that our listeners learned a lot. So a special and sincere thanks to Suzanne Yoon for your time today to talk about your phenomenal career and truly your advice for those looking to grow wealth through investing. We know how busy you are, and we really can appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with us, and it really means a lot to our viewers. And to those of you that are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team at city.treasurer@cityofchicago.org, and we will be certain to get back to you. Until next time, I wish all of you a wonderful, safe, and healthy week, and the happiest of New Year's. Take care.